Artificial Frontier Podcast.
Welcome to our deep dive into plant perception. You've sent us a whole bunch of sources, YouTube videos, articles.
Oh, yeah.
And they all explore this idea.
Right.
About whether plants are more aware than we maybe give them credit for.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, are they just, kind of passively soaking up the sun?
Right.
Or is there something more going on? Could they be feeling, reacting, even communicating?
Yeah.
Let's dive in.
It's interesting how this idea has just captivated our imaginations for centuries, really.
Yeah.
What's fascinating to me is how we're seeing all of these different things kind of converging. You got this ancient wisdom,
Right.
anecdotal observations,
Yeah.
and then now emerging scientific exploration.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
So let's start way back.
Okay.
In the early 20th century, with Jagadish Chandra Bose,
Mm-hmm.
an Indian scientist,
Mm-hmm.
what can you tell us about him and his work?
Well, he was really a true pioneer. Bose designed instruments to study even the tiniest movements in plants. What's really important is that he proposed this idea that plants have a sensory system, much like animals do.
Oh, interesting.
The concept that was, you can imagine, pretty radical back then.
Yeah, I can imagine that challenging the status quo wasn't easy. Did his work get the recognition it deserved at the time?
Well, like many groundbreaking discoveries, it was initially met with resistance from the scientific community.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Uh-huh.
I feel like new ideas often face an uphill battle.
Yeah.
So let's jump ahead a few decades
Okay.
to the 1960s
All right.
and Cleve Backster.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he was a lie detector expert.
It was, yeah.
And he did some pretty unconventional experiments with plants.
Right.
What was he trying to show?
So Baxter was really exploring this possibility,
Right.
that plants react to human thoughts
Okay.
and emotions. And he actually hooked a plant up to a polygraph,
Hold on.
the kind used for lie detection.
A polygraph
Mm.
for a plant. That's wild.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild idea.
Did he get any results?
He claimed he did. One really famous experiment involved him thinking about burning a leaf on the plant that he had hooked up.
Okay.
And according to Baxter, the plant, through the polygraph, reacted to his intention to burn it,
Wow.
even before he actually did anything.
So he's saying the plant reacted to a thought.
That's what he's saying.
Okay. What did the scientific community think of this?
There was a lot of skepticism,
Right.
and rightly so.
Yeah.
Many scientists questioned his methods
Right.
and whether the plant's reactions could be explained by other factors.
Yeah. I can see why that would be controversial. So was Baxter's work debunked?
It's more nuanced than that.
Okay.
While his work was never fully accepted by mainstream science,
Right.
it did inspire other researchers to explore this possibility of plant perception,
Okay.
albeit through some different approaches.
Got it. So tell me about some of those other approaches.
So, for example, Marcel Vogel,
Okay.
an IBM scientist,
Oh.
he believed that a strong emotional connection between the researcher and the plant
Mm-hmm.
was crucial
For what?
for observing any reactions.
So it wasn't just the thought itself, but the feeling behind it.
Precisely. Vogel believed that plants could actually mirror human emotions,
Really?
acting as extensions of our own energy fields. He even theorized that one day we might be able to read people's thoughts through plants.
It's a pretty wild idea.
It is pretty wild.
Were there other researchers exploring these ideas too?
Yes, quite a few, actually.
Oh, cool.
So, for instance, Pierre Paul Savin, he used plants to trigger electrical circuits remotely,
Oh, wow.
demonstrating a potential connection between intention and plant response. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, scientists were using sophisticated instruments to investigate plant communication.
Wait. Soviet scientists were studying this too.
Yeah.
What kind of research were they doing?
They were very interested in the practical applications of plant perception.
Oh.
One article you shared described how researchers at the Timiryazev Academy of Agricultural Sciences observed a barley sprout seemingly crying out when its roots were dipped into hot water.
Crying out. How did they measure that?
They were using these sensitive electronic instruments,
Okay.
and the recording pen on the instrument went haywire,
Oh, wow.
suggesting some kind of distress signal from the plant.
That's fascinating.
Mm.
So was this research all about measuring plant reactions, or were they looking for practical applications too?
They were definitely looking for ways to apply this knowledge.
Okay.
Vladimir Kermanov, a scientist at the Institute of Agrophysics,
Okay.
demonstrated that plants could signal their needs
For what?
for light and water.
Using instruments.
Using instruments, yeah. He even envisioned a future where plants would auto-regulate their environment
Wow.
for optimal growth.
That's pretty cool. So it seems like the Soviet scientists were taking a more practical, less mystical approach to plant perception research. Did this influence researchers in the West?
It did. Two authors, Peter Tompkins and Christopher Bird, traveled extensively
Okay.
to document research on plant perception in both the East and the West
Oh, okay.
for their book, The Secret Life of Plants.
I've heard of that book. The title alone just captures the mystery of this whole subject. What were their main arguments about plant intelligence?
They argued that plants are far more complex and aware than we usually think.
Okay.
They pointed to evidence of plant sentience,
What?
communication,
Okay.
and even the ability to respond to human emotions.
Hold on. They were suggesting plants are conscious beings.
That's what they're suggesting.
That must have been pretty controversial.
It was and still is.
Oh, yeah.
The Secret Life of Plants was both praised for its fascinating insights
Right.
and criticized for its lack of scientific rigor.
I see.
However, it definitely helped spark public interest in the idea of plant intelligence.
Okay, let's break this down a bit.
All right.
What were some of the specific examples they used to support their claims?
Well, they discussed Cleve Backster's experiments with the polygraph,
Right.
which we talked about earlier.
Right.
They also described an intriguing example of a plant seemingly reacting to the death of brine shrimp in a separate room.
Wait, the plant reacted to the death of shrimp in another room?
That's what they observed.
How could that even be possible?
That's the big question. Baxter theorized that maybe there's some kind of primary perception,
Yeah.
a sense beyond our 5 basic senses,
Okay.
that allows all living things to communicate on a deeper level.
So they were suggesting that plants might have senses we don't even understand.
Exactly. And that brings us to the crux of the matter.
Which is?
What is sentience?
Right.
And how can we even begin to measure it in organisms so different from ourselves?
That's a great question. I think it's easy to get caught up in the amazing stories and anecdotes,
Yeah,
but it's important to define what we're actually talking about when we use a term like sentience.
absolutely. When we talk about plant sentience, we're referring to their ability to perceive
Okay.
and respond to their environment
Okay.
in a way that suggests some level of awareness. But that awareness might be very different from our own.
So it's not necessarily that plants are thinking or feeling the way humans do, but that they have their own ways of experiencing the world.
Right. And this is where modern research starts to get really interesting.
Okay.
Instead of focusing on anecdotal evidence, scientists are now using rigorous methods to explore plant communication and behavior. For example, recent research on fungal networks
Okay.
and plant signaling provides some of the most compelling evidence yet for complex communication.
Within the plant kingdom.
And in the plant kingdom,
Fungal networks, what are those?
scientists have discovered that forests are interconnected through these massive underground networks of fungi. These networks, sometimes called the Wood Wide Web, allow trees to communicate and share resources.
So trees are actually talking to each other. How does that work?
In a way, yeah, they can send these chemical signals through these fungal networks,
Okay.
warning each other of dangers like insect attacks or drought.
Oh, wow.
They can even share nutrients with trees that are struggling.
So instead of competing for resources, they're actually cooperating.
Exactly. And it really challenges our traditional view of forests
Right.
as just these collections of individual trees.
Yeah.
Instead, we need to start thinking of them as these complex, interconnected ecosystems
Okay.
with a level of communication and cooperation we're only beginning to understand.
This Wood Wide Web is pretty mind-blowing.
It is.
Does this change how we think about just even a walk in the woods?
Yeah.
I mean, is the forest experiencing us in some way?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of what plant perception might actually mean for us.
Yeah.
While we can't say for sure what, if anything, plants experience,
Right.
we know they're constantly reacting and responding to their surroundings, including the presence of humans.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about this idea that plants can react to human emotions specifically?
Right.
Is there any scientific basis for that?
Some researchers believe that plants might be sensitive to changes in electromagnetic fields around them.
Okay.
Humans generate these fields, and our emotions can influence them.
Right.
So it's possible that plants could be picking up on those subtle changes.
So it's like our feelings are creating a kind of energetic vibe
Yeah.
that plants can sense?
Yeah, you could think of it that way.
I'm trying to wrap my head around that.
It's a fascinating possibility, but it's important to remember that this is still a very speculative area of research.
Right.
There's no definitive proof that plants can sense human emotions in this way.
We need to be careful not to jump to conclusions.
Right.
But from everything we've learned so far, it seems like this whole field of plant perception is still wide open for exploration.
Oh, yeah.
What are some of the most promising areas of future research?
There are so many avenues to explore. Like, we need to understand more about how plants perceive their surroundings.
Okay.
What kind of sensory information are they gathering?
Yeah.
How do they process this information?
Right.
What are the specific mechanisms of communication through those fungal networks? And how might this understanding change how we interact with plants, especially in agriculture?
It's exciting to think about all the possibilities,
It is.
but it's also a bit humbling.
Yeah.
We often see ourselves as the most intelligent beings on the planet, but maybe plants have a kind of wisdom that we haven't even begun to grasp.
It's certainly possible. If we can learn to listen to plants, they might have a lot to teach us
About what?
about life connection and the delicate balance of nature.
That's a beautiful thought.
Yeah.
But it also raises some questions.
Sure.
If plants are more aware and responsive than we've given them credit for,
Right.
what does that mean ethically?
That's an important consideration.
Yeah.
If plants are truly sentient beings capable of feeling and responding to stimuli, then we need to reevaluate how we treat them.
So this isn't just about scientific curiosity anymore.
Right.
It's about respect for all forms of life.
Exactly. We need to think about the ethical implications of our actions toward plants.
Yeah.
Especially in areas like agriculture, where we often treat them as commodities rather than living beings.
Yeah, I'm starting to see how this knowledge of plant perception could lead to a more compassionate and sustainable way of interacting with the natural world.
Potentially, yes. If we can understand and respect the intelligence of plants, it could lead to a more harmonious relationship between humans and nature.
You mentioned agriculture. Do you think this knowledge could actually change how we grow food?
It certainly has the potential.
How so?
If we can better understand how plants communicate and what their needs are,
Okay.
we might be able to develop more sustainable farming practices
Right.
that are in harmony with the natural world.
That's a hopeful thought. It seems like this research on plant perception could have ripple effects throughout society, affecting everything from our diets to our spiritual beliefs.
Yeah.
It's a lot to process.
It definitely challenges our fundamental assumptions about the nature of life and our place in the universe.
Before we get too lost in the cosmic implications,
Good.
I want to bring it back to some of the specific claims made about plant perception.
Okay.
For example, some plants are carnivorous.
Right.
How does that fit into this whole idea of plant sentience?
Carnivorous plants are fascinating.
They are.
They've evolved in these nutrient-poor environments
Okay.
and have developed these amazing ways to get the nutrients they need from insects and other small animals.
It is pretty ingenious how they've adapted to survive
Yeah.
with these elaborate traps and digestive enzymes. But does that mean they're thinking about catching their prey?
That's a question that sparks a lot of debate.
Yeah.
Some researchers think their traps are simply mechanical responses to stimuli.
Cool.
Others believe there might be a more complex level of awareness involved.
I guess when we think about sentience, we tend to think in human terms, but maybe plants have a completely different way of experiencing the world.
Exactly. We can't project our own human perceptions onto plants.
Right.
They've evolved over millions of years to survive in their own unique ways.
Yeah.
And their intelligence might be something we can't fully grasp.
This discussion has really opened my eyes to the wonders of the plant kingdom.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
But I know there are a lot of skeptics out there. What would you say to someone who thinks this whole idea of plant intelligence is just a bunch of hooey?
I'd say to keep an open mind. The scientific study of plant perception is still relatively new,
Right.
and there's so much more to discover. But the evidence we do have suggests that plants are far more complex and aware than we've traditionally thought.
Okay.
They may not have brains like ours,
Right.
but they're clearly not just passive organisms.
I like that. Keep an open mind.
Yeah.
It reminds me that our preconceived notions can sometimes block us from seeing the amazing things right in front of us.
That's a great point. And sometimes the most groundbreaking discoveries come from questioning our assumptions and being open to new possibilities.
Well said. This deep dive has taken us on quite a journey through the world of plant perception.
It has.
From those early pioneers like Jagadish Chandra Bose and Cleve Backster
Right.
to the modern research on the Wood Wide Web,
Yeah.
we've learned about the potential for plants to communicate, share resources, and even react to human emotions.
It's amazing.
And we've explored the ethical considerations of plant sentience. It's been an eye-opening experience.
It really has. And it's clear we've only just scratched the surface of this fascinating field of study. There's still so much we can learn from observing, experimenting, and, simply appreciating the intricate lives of plants.
It makes you wonder if we've underestimated plants in other ways, too.
Right.
Like, what are some of the big unanswered questions in this field?
I think one of the biggest mysteries is how plants actually sense and respond to their environment.
Okay.
Do they have something akin to, like our senses? Or are they perceiving the world in ways that we can't even imagine?
That's a good question.
And if they are communicating, what kind of information are they actually sharing?
Right.
Are they warning each other about danger?
Okay.
Are they coordinating growth strategies?
Interesting.
Or even sharing something like memories through generations?
That last one about memories is especially intriguing.
Yeah.
I remember reading something about how some trees seem to pass on knowledge about past droughts to their offspring.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any truth to that?
There's some evidence to suggest that plants can inherit certain traits from their parents that help them cope with environmental stress.
Interesting.
For example, if a parent tree experienced a severe drought, its offspring might be better equipped to handle water scarcity. It's not quite the same as, conscious memory.
Right.
But it does suggest that plants can pass on information about past experiences in some form.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Challenges our whole concept of what memory even is.
Exactly. And it highlights the fact that intelligence can take many forms.
Yeah.
We tend to define intelligence based on our own human capabilities, but maybe that's a limited perspective.
So what can we as individuals take away from all of this?
Yeah.
How can this knowledge of plant perception change how we interact with the world around us?
Perhaps the biggest takeaway is a sense of wonder.
Artificial Frontier Podcast.